Elijah Harlan was 41 years old, and he believed, truly believed, deep in his bones, that a man who builds well never needs to shout about it. He had built everything slowly, carefully, the way his father taught him. You pour the foundation first. You don't talk about the foundation. You just pour it, let it cure, and then you build on top of it and let the work speak. He had built a marriage the same way. Then, on a Tuesday morning in October, his wife slid divorce papers across a mahogany conference table on the 42nd floor of the Sterling Hargrove building in downtown Atlanta, and laughed while she did it. But here is the thing nobody in that room understood. Elijah Harlan wasn't surprised, not even slightly. And that faint, almost invisible smile on his face as he walked out into the rain? That wasn't grief. That wasn't bravado. That was a man who had already finished pouring the foundation and was simply waiting for everyone else to catch up. Before we get into the full story, I want you to stay with me all the way to the end, because what Elijah does over the next 14 months, quietly, patiently, without a single public word, is one of the most satisfying things I have ever had the privilege of telling. So settle in, sweet friend. This one is worth every minute. Now, let's go back to that Tuesday morning in October. Atlanta was doing what Atlanta does in the fall. Half the city golden and beautiful, the other half soaked in cold, relentless rain. The kind of rain that comes sideways. The kind that finds you no matter which way you angle your umbrella. Elijah had driven downtown in his old gray Camry. The same Camry with the cracked dashboard vent and the gospel station that cuts out on I-285. He had a thermos of his mother Gloria's coffee, strong enough to wake a sleeping man. And he was wearing his good charcoal suit, the one he wore to his father's funeral 3 years prior. He had ironed it himself that morning, carefully, the way his father had taught him. Collar first, then the shoulders. He knew what the meeting was about. He had known for 6 weeks. The 42nd floor of the Sterling Hargrove building smelled like money. That particular combination of fresh coffee, leather furniture, and air conditioning set 3 degrees too cold. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over downtown Atlanta. The rain streaked the glass in long silver lines. Vanessa was already seated when Elijah walked in. She looked polished and composed. An ivory blazer, fresh highlights, the kind of posture that takes practice to maintain. Beside her sat her mother Renee, a sharp-featured woman who had never quite managed to hide her low opinion of Elijah, and a family lawyer named Bright, who smelled faintly of expensive cologne and cheaper character. On the table between them, a thick stack of papers, neatly bound. Vanessa slid them across without preamble. "Sign it, Elijah." Her voice was calm, almost bored. "I don't need you anymore. Douglas will give me the life I deserve." Elijah looked at the papers. He did not pick them up immediately. He simply looked at them the way a structural engineer looks at a blueprint, methodically, without emotional noise. Renee leaned back in her chair and made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sigh. "He's just an ordinary black engineer, nothing but a small inheritance from his father." She said it the way people say things they've said 100 times, casually, like stating the weather. The lawyer smiled politely at his notepad. Elijah let the silence sit for a moment. Then he picked up the papers and began reading, slowly, every page, while the rain hammered the windows and Vanessa checked her phone. When he was done, he set the papers down. "I only want to keep the old 2-acre lot behind my father's house," he said. His voice was quiet and even. "The one with the old workshop. That's all." The room went still for 1 second. Then erupted. Renee laughed. A genuine, unguarded laugh. 2 acres of wasteland. She shook her head with something like pity. "He really has nothing but a pile of rusted metal." The lawyer chuckled softly. Even Vanessa's composed expression broke into something sharper. She reached up, twisted the 3-carat diamond off her left hand, slowly, deliberately, and dropped it into the champagne flute sitting at her elbow. The small clink of the ring hitting crystal cut through the laughter with surgical precision. "A farewell gift," she said, "for my little engineer." Elijah watched the ring settle at the bottom of the glass. He watched the champagne bubbles rise around it. Then he picked up the pen. He signed every page, methodically, without hesitation. When he was finished, he removed his own wedding band, a simple gold ring he'd worn for 9 years, and placed it gently on the table beside the stack of papers. Not thrown, not slammed. Placed. Like the period at the end of a sentence he had been composing for a long time. He stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked out. No argument, no final word, no slammed door. Just the sound of his footsteps on the marble floor. And then the soft hiss of the elevator doors closing behind him. Out on the street, the rain hit him immediately, cold and sideways and absolute. He stood on the curb for a moment, his good charcoal suit darkening at the shoulders. He did not run for cover. He simply stood there, eyes forward, breathing the cold air. And then he smiled. Not the wounded smile of a man holding himself together. Not the bitter smile of someone plotting something ugly. A quiet, private smile. The kind you make when everything is finally exactly where you need it to be. A sleek black Rolls-Royce Cullinan glided silently to the curb in front of him. The driver stepped out and opened the rear door without a word. Elijah got in. They thought he had lost everything. But in truth, he had just begun. Stay with me, because what Elijah does in the next 3 weeks will make you wonder whether the quietest man you've ever known might also be the most prepared. 3 weeks after the divorce was finalized, Vanessa Hargrove was live on Instagram. She was standing in the grand foyer of the Pinnacle Hotel in Midtown Atlanta, wearing a gown that cost more than most people's monthly mortgage, a glass of champagne in one hand, and Douglas Fenn's arm hooked through the other. The ballroom behind her glittered. Everything glittered. That was the whole point. "From a failed engineer to a real man," she said into the camera, her smile wide and perfectly practiced. She tagged Douglas. She added the hashtag, "Upgrade Complete." The comment section lit up within minutes. "What is that engineer even doing now? Congrats on upgrading from dead weight, girl. You deserve the best, queen." Vanessa read every one of those comments. She was building a story. The story of the woman who finally chose herself, finally stopped settling, finally arrived where she always belonged. The story was airtight. The story was beautiful. The story had one problem. It was built entirely on someone else's foundation. Douglas Finn was the kind of man who filled a room and knew it. Broad-shouldered, expensively dressed, always arriving with an announcement. He had founded Fentech Infrastructure 5 years earlier on a combination of real technical instinct and extraordinary early luck. A major contract with a large Atlanta developer had put his name on everyone's lips. Since then, he had expanded aggressively, borrowed ambitiously, and spoken loudly enough that most people forgot to look closely at the numbers. He drove a white Bentley Bentayga and wore his watch on his right wrist so people would see it faster when he reached for his phone. He had once told a room full of investors that he never lost sleep, not once, because confident men simply didn't. He had no idea who Elijah Harlan was. That was the thing about quiet men. People rarely learn their names until it was too late. 47 miles south of the Pinnacle Hotel, on a 2-acre lot outside Stockbridge, Georgia, the workshop that Renee had called a pile of rusted metal was lit up at 11 o'clock at night. The old workshop had been Elijah's father's. A cinder block building with a corrugated metal roof and a concrete floor stained with 40 years of oil and sawdust and the particular kind of effort that doesn't need an audience. James Harlan had been a civil engineer for the city of Atlanta for 32 years. He had believed in two things with equal seriousness: the Bible and load-bearing infrastructure. He had died leaving both of them intact. Elijah had spent the first night after his divorce sitting on the workshop's front step, listening to the Georgia crickets, drinking the last of his mother's strong coffee from the thermos. He had not been grieving. He had been finishing a calculation he had begun 14 months ago. Because here is what very few people understood about Elijah Harlan. 3 years earlier, after his father received a serious cardiac diagnosis, Vanessa had come to him with tears in her eyes. She told him she had found a lump, that the doctors were worried, that she was frightened. Elijah had believed her, completely, without question, because she was his wife and he loved her, and that was what you did for the person you had promised your life to. He liquidated his father's entire estate. $214,000, accumulated over a lifetime of careful, disciplined work. He gave every cent of it toward what he believed were Vanessa's medical costs: specialists, consultations, treatments, follow-ups that went on for months. There had been no diagnosis. The money had gone into an account in Vanessa's maiden name. Some of it toward Douglas Finn. The rest toward a version of her future that had no room for Elijah in it. When Elijah discovered the truth, not in a confrontation, not through an accusation, but quietly, the way a structural engineer discovers a hidden crack in a wall, he did not explode. He did not confront. He sat with it for 72 hours, very still, the way men who understand load-bearing structures sit when they find out exactly which beam has been compromised. Then he opened a new folder on his laptop. He labeled it Harlan Infrastructure, and he went to work. Over the 14 months that followed, working through holding companies, patient contract negotiations, and a careful, methodical acquisition strategy, Elijah had done something that nobody had thought to look for. Fentech infrastructure ran on materials: concrete, steel framing, composite panels, electrical conduit, roofing systems, specialty glass. Every major supplier in Douglas Fenn's operational chain, one by one, quietly, Harlan Infrastructure had acquired them all. But supply chain control was only part of what Elijah had built. He had also been tracking something else: Fentech's debt. Douglas had borrowed heavily to finance 2 recent expansion rounds, spreading his loan obligations across 3 separate lending institutions, a common enough strategy, but one that created vulnerability if those obligations were ever consolidated under a single holder. Over the preceding 4 months, through Meridian Structural Partners, a holding company wholly owned by Harlan Infrastructure, Elijah had purchased every one of those loan packages, quietly, legally, at fair market value. As of that week, Elijah Harlan held both the supply lines Fintech needed to operate and the debt obligations that kept the company standing. The corkboard in the workshop mapped every thread. He stood before it on a Wednesday evening, sleeves rolled to the elbows, a red marker in his hand. He drew one final connecting line between 2 company names and stepped back. Then he picked up his phone and called his mother. Gloria Harlan answered on the second ring. The familiar music from her Hallmark movie drifted through. One of those November ones where the big city woman comes home and falls in love with the quiet small-town man. Gloria had a particular weakness for those. Said they reminded her that common sense still had a fighting chance. "Baby," she said, "you eating?" "Yes, ma'am." Real food or convenience store food? Combination. She made a sound. Elijah James Harlan. "Don't worry, Mom." His voice was warm and even. "Everything is ready." A pause. The Hallmark music swelled. Gloria turned the volume down a notch. "Everything?" she said quietly. Everything. She let out a long breath. "Your daddy would be proud," she said. "Now go eat a real meal." The next morning, Elijah made a different call. Camille Ashford had built Ashford Development Group from a single commercial contract in Birmingham into a firm operating across 7 southern states. She was 39, and she was calm in the way that deep rivers are calm. Still on the surface, tremendous force moving underneath. She had known Elijah professionally for 4 years, had watched closely how he operated, and had drawn her own conclusions some time ago. Those conclusions were favorable. "Camille," he said when she picked up, "I'm ready to move on the green project, but before that, I need your help with one more thing." A brief, considered silence. "What kind of thing?" she said. "The kind that requires patience and a level head." "I trust you, Elijah." She said it simply, the way a person states something they stopped questioning a while ago. He thanked her and ended the call. Back at the Pinnacle Hotel, 47 miles away, Vanessa and Douglas were cutting the engagement cake. A 6-tier fondant tower with gold leaf and their initials intertwined. The crowd applauded. A second bottle of Cristal was opened. Vanessa leaned into Douglas's shoulder and laughed at something he whispered, and she had never felt more certain of anything. At Fulton County Airport, a black Sikorsky S-76C helicopter sat on the tarmac. The rotors were beginning to turn. The pilot glanced back. "Destination, sir?" Elijah fastened his seatbelt and adjusted his collar. "The Pinnacle," he said, right when they cut the cake. Have you ever wondered whether the quietest person in the room might, in fact, be the most prepared one? Because what happens when that helicopter lands will answer that question completely. The engagement party was at its absolute peak. The Pinnacle's grand ballroom had been transformed. Warm amber light falling from chandeliers the size of small cars. White floral arrangements running the full length of every table. A jazz quartet in the far corner playing something low and elegant. 300 guests. Atlanta's business class, its PR world, and the particular category of person who attends events primarily to have attended them. Phones were everywhere, recording everything. Someone had arranged a branded hashtag display near the entrance. The ice sculpture, a large interlocking V and D, was melting at a dignified pace near the appetizer station. Vanessa held her champagne flute like a scepter. She had waited a long time for a night like this. She scanned the room with the practiced eye of someone who had spent a career in marketing and knew that a room is also a message. And this room was saying precisely what she wanted it to say. That she had chosen correctly. That she had arrived. That Elijah Harlan was a closed chapter no one needed to reopen. Douglas stood beside her, broad-shouldered and gleaming, already midway through a story that was drawing laughter from the circle nearest him. He caught Vanessa's eye and winked. She smiled back. The cake arrived. 6 tiers of fondant. Gold leaf. Their initials. The crowd pressed forward. The quartet shifted to something slower. Vanessa reached for the cake knife. And then the building shook. Not an earthquake, though for half a second it registered that way. A deep, rhythmic thunder that rattled the ballroom windows and set 300 people looking up at the ceiling simultaneously. Rotors. Someone near a window said it first, low and disbelieving. "There's a helicopter. On the roof." The music stopped. Not gradually. Cut, as if someone had pulled a wire. The jazz quartet lowered their instruments and stared upward along with everyone else. Then the rooftop access door opened. Wind entered first. A cold rush of October air that swept across the ballroom floor and sent cocktail napkins skittering. The amber light flickered once, and through that door, moving with the unhurried, measured stride of a man who is prepared for exactly this moment and is in no rush whatsoever, came Elijah Harlan. Dark suit, no tie. one shirt button open at the collar. He looked rested in a way that was almost offensive given the circumstances. Like a man who had been sleeping well for the first time in years, which was, in fact, exactly true. 300 people stared at him. Phones swung in his direction. Live streams that had been broadcasting Vanessa and Douglas now tracked automatically toward the disruption at the door. The hashtag Elijah Harlan is that guy would begin trending across Atlanta in approximately 8 minutes, though Elijah was not aware of this and would not have changed anything if he had been. He walked into the center of the ballroom as though he had designed the room himself. Vanessa's composure, that carefully maintained, ivory blazer composure she had been projecting since October, cracked in real time. Her face moved through 4 expressions in about 2 seconds. Shock, fury, something that briefly resembled fear, and then a reconstruction of fury laid firmly on top of it. "Elijah," her voice was sharp. "How dare you show up here?" Elijah did not look at her. He looked at Douglas Fenn. Douglas had drawn himself to full height. His jaw was set, his eyes hard and calculating in the way men's eyes go when their performance is suddenly at risk. "Security." He said it with flat authority. No yelling, just the steady tone of a man who expected immediate compliance. 4 members of the venue's security detail stood along the wall. Not one of them moved. The head of the team, a broad man named Marcus who had worked Atlanta events for 12 years, lowered his gaze toward the floor. His voice was quiet, but reached every corner of the room in the total silence. "I'm sorry, Mr. Fenn. We signed a new service contract last week with Harlan Infrastructure." The air in the room changed. It changed the way air changes right before a serious storm. Not violently, but completely. Something that had been present one moment was gone the next, replaced by something heavier and more sober. Douglas looked at Marcus. Marcus did not look up. Elijah reached inside his jacket and removed a sealed envelope. He crossed the room and set it in Douglas Fenn's hands, with the same quiet deliberateness he had used to place his wedding ring on a conference table 3 weeks before. "Congratulations on your engagement," Elijah said. "This is your company's supply chain audit." Douglas stared at the envelope. He didn't want to open it in front of 300 people. And yet, his hands were already tearing the seal. Not because he chose to, but because some deep professional instinct already knew. The part of a man who understands structures always knows when something is wrong with a building, even before the engineer shows him the report. The pages inside were clean, organized, and exact. Each one outlined a supplier, a contract date, and an acquisition record. Douglas turned the first page, then the second, then the third. His face went gray. Concrete supply. Harlan Infrastructure. Acquired 14 months ago. Steel framing. Harlan Infrastructure. Acquired 11 months ago. Composite panels. Electrical conduit. Roofing systems. Specialty glass. Harlan Infrastructure. Harlan Infrastructure. Harlan Infrastructure. Harlan Infrastructure. Page after page after page. Every single materials vendor that FinTech depended on to operate. Every supply contract, every fulfillment relationship had been quietly, methodically, entirely acquired by Elijah Harlan, while Douglas Fenn was attending events like this one and telling rooms full of people that he never lost sleep. Douglas looked up from the final page. He looked at Elijah with an expression that had traveled considerable distance in the past 30 seconds. From disbelief, through calculation, to something involuntary and honest that was very close to recognition. Not admiration exactly, not yet, but the particular respect that a man cannot withhold when he finally understands the scale of what he was looking at. "You've been doing this for over a year," Douglas said. His voice was low, not yet composed. 14 months, Elijah said. give or take a week. Vanessa was 2 feet away. She had gone very still. The words from the conference room were running back through her head now. Her mother's voice, easy and contemptuous. He's just an ordinary black engineer. Nothing but a small inheritance. And for the first time, something cold and unfamiliar was moving through her. Not quite guilt. Something earlier than guilt. The moment before you fully understand what you've done. When the shape of it is just becoming clear and you are still, helplessly, half hoping you are wrong about what you're seeing. She was not wrong. Around them, 300 guests stood motionless. The ice sculpture dripped steadily. Somewhere near the back of the room, a phone filmed in silence. No one spoke. No one laughed. The ballroom that had been the loudest room in Atlanta 40 minutes ago was now so quiet that you could hear the rain resuming outside, soft and persistent, tracing long silver lines down the floor-to-ceiling glass. Elijah looked slowly around the room. Not with triumph. Not with the expression of a man collecting a debt. He looked at it the way a structural engineer looks at a finished building before signing off. Thorough, satisfied, professionally complete. Then he looked back at Douglas. The foundation, Elijah said quietly, is everything. He put his hands in his pockets. He waited. When you think about how long Elijah was building while Vanessa was celebrating, stay with me, because what comes next isn't just one more revelation. It's two. And the second one will take your breath away. 300 people stood in the silence of the Pinnacle Ballroom, and not one of them moved. The jazz quartet had set down their instruments. The catering staff had stopped refilling glasses. Even the ice sculpture seemed to have paused mid-melt in some small, sympathetic gesture of solidarity with the room. The only sounds were the rain against the windows and, somewhere near the back, the faint ambient noise of a live stream viewer count climbing steadily past 10,000. Douglas Fenn held the audit report in both hands. He had stopped turning pages. His eyes were fixed on Elijah with an expression that had taken its time arriving. Disbelief first, then calculation, and now something that had the reluctant, honest quality of a man who has finally understood the full dimension of the situation he is standing in. Elijah stood in the center of the room and let that understanding arrive at its own pace. Vanessa spoke first. Elijah. Her voice had shed the cold authority it carried in the 42nd floor conference room. It wasn't begging, not yet, but it had lost several layers of certainty and was standing there in something considerably thinner. Whatever you think you're doing, this isn't the place. This isn't the time. Elijah turned to look at her. Just turned. Slowly. The way a man turns when he has something to say and has been deciding for a long time whether it is worth saying. I'm not here to ruin your party, Vanessa. His voice was measured and low, carrying the way voices carry in very quiet rooms. I'm here to return what you took, and to reclaim what's mine. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and removed a second document. Not an envelope this time, but a clear presentation folder, organized in clearly labeled sections with dates, figures, account records, and supporting documentation. He set it on the nearest table and opened it. 3 years ago, he said, after my father was diagnosed with a serious heart condition, you came to me in tears. You said you had found a lump, that your doctors were worried, that you were afraid. He paused for a moment, not for effect, but because the words still carried weight, even now. I gave you everything, $214,000 from my father's estate, because you were my wife, and I trusted you completely. The ballroom was absolutely still. Vanessa's eyes moved quickly. To the lawyer who had attended her divorce meeting, who was now studying the floor pattern with great concentration. To Douglas. Back to Elijah. There was no medical diagnosis, Elijah continued, turning a page. "These are records from a bank account opened under your maiden name 18 months into our marriage. These are the transfer records showing where the funds went. And this," he turned one more page, "is a certified statement from the specialist whose name appeared on documents you submitted to me." He closed the folder. He did not need to read further. Douglas Fenn had gone very still. He was looking at Vanessa with eyes that had changed. They were cold now and calculating in the way that men's eyes go when they realize they have been standing on someone else's untruth and the ground beneath them is no longer stable. "You lied to me." He said it quietly, without drama, the flat, precise tone of a man stating something he half knew and is only now permitting himself to confirm. From the very beginning, Vanessa opened her mouth. She closed it. Was any of it real? His voice did not rise. That, somehow, was worse than if it had. Any of it at all? Vanessa looked at Elijah, as if, incredibly, she expected him to intervene on her behalf. He didn't. Elijah reached into the folder once more and removed a single final page. He set it on the table with the same unhurried care he applied to everything. "I've also acquired the debt portfolio backing FinTech's last 2 expansion rounds," he said. His voice was steady and entirely professional, carrying none of the heat the moment could have justified. 3 separate lending institutions sold your consolidated loan obligations to a holding company called Meridian Structural Partners over the past 4 months. Meridian is wholly owned by Harlan Infrastructure. He looked at Douglas directly. "As of 9 o'clock this morning, the debt is mine, which means the operating authority over FinTech's core assets now belongs to Harlan Infrastructure." The silence that followed was different from all the silences that had come before it in that room. It was total. It was the silence of 300 people absorbing simultaneously the full architecture of what they had just witnessed. Not a confrontation, not a scene. Something far more unsettling. A plan, 14 months in the making, executing with the quiet, irreversible precision of a foundation settling into place. Douglas's hands lowered. The audit report slipped from his fingers and fell against the table with the soft, deflated sound of pages losing their grip. He sat down, not purposefully, but the way a man sits when his legs decide before his mind does. Vanessa moved. Her instinct, the instinct of a woman who had spent a career managing narratives, was to move toward the center of the room, where she might still find some angle of control. She took 2 steps, then stopped, because there was no narrative left. There was only the ballroom, the documents on the table, the 300 witnesses, and the sound of rain steady against glass. She sank to her knees, not gracefully, not performatively. Her legs simply gave way, and she went with them, kneeling on the polished floor of her engagement party, in her gown and her gold leaf evening, and what came out of her was real in a way that very little about the past 3 years had been. "Elijah." Her voice was raw. "I'm sorry. I know what I did. I know it. Please." Elijah looked at her. He looked at her fully, the way he had always looked at things, without flinching, without looking away. He saw the woman he had married and loved honestly for 9 years. He saw the woman who had dropped his wedding ring into a champagne glass and laughed. He saw his father's life savings assembled dollar by dollar over 32 years of early mornings and late nights and careful, unglamorous work. He looked at all of it, and then he spoke. Quietly, not to Vanessa and not to Douglas, but into the absolute stillness of the room, the way people speak when they are finally saying something true out loud after a very long time. "I stayed silent because I loved her." A breath. Now I stay silent because she is no longer someone I need to address. He buttoned the single button of his jacket. He picked up the presentation folder. He walked back toward the rooftop access door, the same door through which the October wind had come, at the same unhurried pace with which he had entered. No backward glance, no parting gesture. The door opened. The cold air came through. The door closed behind him. Seconds later, the rotors filled the building, rising, then fading, then gone entirely, leaving only the rain and the silence and the 300 people who stood in it, none of them moving, all of them certain they had just witnessed something they would be telling for the rest of their lives. Vanessa remained on the floor of the ballroom. She made no sound. The champagne in the nearest glass had gone flat. The cake stood untouched. The ice sculpture continued its quiet, indifferent work of becoming water. Outside, the rain came down long and silver on the windows of the Pinnacle Hotel. Stay with me, because what Elijah chooses to do with his victory in the next 48 hours is not what most people would expect. And it may be the most important part of this entire story. By morning, Atlanta had opinions. The live streams from the Pinnacle Ballroom had spread the way fire spreads in dry weather, fast, complete, and not particularly selective about what it consumed. By 2 in the morning, the clips were circulating on local news feeds. By 6, regional business outlets were running summaries. Within 48 hours, the story had been covered, dissected, and turned into content by hundreds of accounts Elijah had never heard of and would not have cared about if he had. The headline that ran in the Atlanta Business Chronicle was the one Gloria Harlan cut out with scissors and taped to her refrigerator, right beside the framed photograph of James. Harlan Infrastructure acquires fintech assets in strategic move. Founder Elijah Harlan emerges as major force in Southern construction market. She made herself a cup of coffee. She sat at her kitchen table in Stockbridge. She read it 4 times. Then she called her son. "I saw the paper," she said. "Yes, ma'am." A pause. Outside her kitchen window, the yard was still wet from the night's rain. "Your father used to say a good building doesn't need a ribbon cutting." "I know he did," Elijah said. "I was listening." Gloria was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had something in it that she hadn't let herself release in a long time. "He would be so proud of you, baby." "I know that too," Elijah said softly. "Go eat your breakfast, Mom." Vanessa's world moved differently. The morning after the Pinnacle, she woke in a hotel room she'd booked on a card that had declined on the first attempt. Douglas had not called. He had, in fact, retained his own attorney before sunrise and issued a formal statement through his PR firm distancing himself from her entirely. Which was, she understood with a clarity she hadn't asked for, both professionally logical and personally devastating in a way she had not fully prepared for. She opened her phone. The follower count was moving in the wrong direction. Comments had accumulated overnight on posts she hadn't yet thought to remove. The Upgrade Complete post was still up. She stared at it for a long moment. Then she deleted it. Then she deleted several others. Then she set the phone face down on the hotel comforter and sat in the silence of her own making for a long time. Her mother called at 8 in the morning. Vanessa Marie. Renee's voice had none of the sharp superiority from the conference room, none of the easy contempt, none of the champagne laughter. It was the voice of a woman who has watched something irreplaceable break and is trying to determine fault while already knowing where it lies. "What did you do?" It was not a question. Vanessa said nothing. "You had a good man," Renee said. The flatness of it was worse than anger could have been. "A steady, decent man who would have built a real life with you, and you—" She stopped herself, breathed. "You destroyed it all, with your own hands." Vanessa held the phone against her cheek and listened to her mother say the most truthful thing Renee Hargrove had ever said to her. She didn't argue. There was nothing to argue. Now, here is what Elijah Harlan did not do. He did not hold a press conference. He gave no interviews to the 4 journalists who left voicemails that week. He did not appear on television, did not publish a statement, did not drive past Vanessa's hotel or Douglas's office building. He took no victory laps. He posted nothing. He went back to work. 3 days after the pinnacle, Elijah sat with his attorneys and executed a series of financial transfers that took most of the morning. Every dollar repaid under the civil settlement terms, the full $214,000 plus applicable interest, moved from Harlan Infrastructure's operating account into a newly established charitable foundation. The foundation was named the James R. Harlan Memorial Fund for Structural Education. Its mission? Scholarship support for Black engineering students at Georgia's public universities. Elijah signed the incorporation documents at the drafting table in the old workshop, using the plain blue Bic ballpoint that had lived in the top drawer of his father's desk for 32 years and had signed every engineering certification James Harlan had ever produced. The most ordinary pen in the room. The one Elijah would have chosen if he'd had every pen in Atlanta to pick from. He signed. He held the pen for a moment. Then he placed it back in the drawer. The press release that followed was brief, precise, and issued on a Friday afternoon. The time slot professionals use when they want information to land without fanfare. Harlan Infrastructure and Ashford Development Group were entering a formal partnership to develop a landmark green infrastructure corridor across 5 southern states. The project scope was extensive. The timeline was ambitious. The lead on design and execution was Elijah Harlan. The project was, not incidentally, the same initiative Douglas Finn had spent an entire industry gala announcing that FinTech would be leading. Douglas Finn, at the time of the press release, was in preliminary restructuring discussions with his attorney. Atlanta's business community, which is always operated on an intricate economy of reputation and carefully passed story, processed the events of that October with the measured, thorough quality it reserves for lessons it considers important. Vanessa and Douglas became the season's cautionary tale. Not with cruelty, not with sustained mockery, but with the quiet, collective authority of a community that had watched something unfold and wanted to make sure it was properly remembered. At dinner tables and in lobby conversations and over coffee after early church services, people who had been in that ballroom said a version of the same thing, in a version of the same tone. You know, I never really noticed him. He was always just there, quiet, patient. And then one night, that helicopter. They shook their heads. They smiled. But the moment that matters most in Elijah Harlan's story doesn't happen in a boardroom or a ballroom or a headline. It happens on a 2-acre lot in Stockbridge, Georgia, on a morning in early spring. And I promise you, it is worth the wait. Spring came to Stockbridge, Georgia, the way spring comes to the South, all at once, almost without announcement. One week the trees are bare and the mornings smell like cold clay, and the next the dogwoods are open and the air has gone warm and green and full of something that feels unmistakably like beginning. Elijah Harlan stood at the entrance of the 2-acre lot on a Saturday morning in April and looked at what 6 months of patient work had produced. The cinder block workshop was still there. He had kept it deliberately, restored rather than demolished, because some things earn their place not through impressiveness, but through honesty. But surrounding it now, rising from the Georgia clay with clean lines and generous windows, and the particular quiet beauty of a building designed for purpose rather than display, was something new. The James R. Harlan Institute for Structural Engineering, a research center and scholarship facility. Modest in scale, exceptional in finish. The kind of building that does not announce itself from the road, but earns you completely once you step inside. Elijah had his father's thermos with him, refilled now with his own coffee, made the same way, same strength. And he was standing at the front entrance, looking at the building, when he heard footsteps on the gravel path behind him. Camille Ashford came up beside him. She was wearing a gray jacket and heels that were entirely impractical for gravel, navigating them with the composed ease of a woman who has long since decided not to let small impracticalities alter her direction. She had driven down from Atlanta that morning. He hadn't asked her to come. She had simply known it was the day, the way people who pay close, real attention to other people tend to know things. She stood beside him and looked at the building. They were quiet together. The kind of quiet that only exists between people who have been through something real, side by side, and come out on the other end, still trusting each other. "You know what strikes me," Camille said after a moment, "is that you never once talked about what you were going to do to them." She wasn't looking at him. She was still looking at the Institute. "You only ever talked about what you were going to build." Elijah turned to look at her. "Because that was the part that mattered," he said. Camille turned to face him then. "That's exactly why you won." No fanfare, no dramatic declaration. She reached out and took his hand, quietly, steadily, with the certainty of someone who has made a considered decision and is at peace with it. Her hand was warm and calm and entirely sure of itself. Elijah looked at their hands. He looked back at the Institute. He thought about his father at the drafting table, drawing under lamplight with that plain blue Bic. He thought about the 42nd floor conference room and the small, cold sound of a ring hitting the bottom of a champagne glass. He thought about the rain on the drive home that October morning, the thermos of strong coffee, the cracked dashboard vent, the gospel station cutting in and out on I-285. He thought about 72 hours of stillness and a folder labeled Harlan Infrastructure, and 14 months of work that no one saw. He had not done any of it out of hatred. He understood that clearly now, if he hadn't before. He had done it because his father had built something honest and real and worth preserving, and he had simply refused to let it be erased. The mockingbird in the tree nearest the old workshop was running through its full catalog, note by note, in the warm April morning. The dogwoods along the fence line were completely open. The sky over Stockbridge was the particular shade of blue that only happens in the South in early spring, when the world is clean and the light is young, and everything is still being decided. Elijah drank his coffee. It felt, simply and without needing to be anything more, like a good morning. Across Atlanta, in a quieter apartment than she had ever imagined inhabiting, Vanessa Hargrove sat at a small table by a window with good morning light. She had stopped checking the business news daily. She had stopped refreshing her follower count. She was trying, in the deliberate and effortful way of someone learning to do something new, to be still. That morning, the news had arrived anyway. A notification, unbidden. A photograph of the James R. Harlan Institute at its dedication ceremony. Elijah at the entrance, Camille beside him. Students from Georgia's engineering programs behind them. The old cinder block workshop visible in the background, restored and honest, standing exactly where it had always stood. Vanessa looked at the photograph for a long time. She did not cry. That season had passed. What she felt now was quieter and more permanent. Not grief exactly, not even regret in its loudest form, but the weight that settles when you understand, fully and without anyone left to redirect it toward, that the life you are living is the precise result of the choices you made. That the cage, such as it was, had always had your own hands on the lock. She set the phone down. The morning light came through the window and lay across the table in a long, warm stripe. She sat with it. This story reminds us of 3 things worth sitting with. The first, noise and substance are not the same thing. Douglas Fenn had the Bentley, the speeches, the watch positioned to catch the light. Elijah had a cinder block workshop and a corkboard. What separated them was not talent or luck. It was that one man spent his energy performing success while the other spent his building it. The next time someone in your life is loud about what they have and dismissive about what you have, look a little closer at the corkboard. The quiet ones are often further along than anyone realizes. The second, when someone shows you a pattern of disregard, consistently over months and years, believe the pattern. Elijah spent 9 years being patient with a woman who had already decided he wasn't enough. Patience is a virtue. Mistaking a pattern for a phase is a different thing entirely. If the person who is supposed to be in your corner has stopped acting like it, that information belongs to you. You are allowed to use it. The third is the one I want you to carry with you past today. If there is a steady, decent man in your life, a son, a grandson, a neighbor who shows up with a bag of mulch without being asked, a friend who has been quietly dependable for so long you've stopped noticing, call him this week. Not a long call. Just set the phone down after dinner some evening, dial his number, and say, "I see what you do. I see who you are. I'm proud of you." 45 seconds. It lands like a foundation being poured. Silence is not weakness. It's the moment you're building something no one else can take. Real humans created these narratives from personal observation and moral conviction. AI helped refine the structure and flow, ensuring the core lessons about dignity, prejudice, and redemption shine through clearly for every viewer.